Woke pandering garbage has been slowly seeping into Hollywood for the past decade and has been no more apparent than in the last few years. And in this year, we've gotten it the worst. There were so many movies, TV shows, video games that had so much woke trash in it that it was impossible to avoid, whether you watched something out of Disney or Warner Brothers or hell, I think even Universal had some, but I'm not sure there are any for the sake of this list. But that's what we're talking about today. We're going over 10 of the biggest examples that we got this year. And like I said, this isn't just movies. This is movies, TV shows, and video games. Even though I will say I think about 60% of this list is movies, so there you go. I'm assuming most of you know what the majority of this list is going to be anyway. So, and also, unlike my top 15 best and worst of 2023, I'm not going to do any editing, because honestly, for these fucking movies and shows and games, it's not worth it, so I'm just gonna stand here and rant for about 10-12 minutes, depending on how long this takes. So the first culprit is obviously Barbie, and does this need any explanation? I've gone over it twice where it's, or actually probably more than that, where it's the biggest man-hating piece of garbage that we've ever seen. And it doesn't help that with everything, the dialogue and how the characters are portrayed, it's hard to talk about because I mentioned this in the bottom 15 that the reason I just don't talk about this one, I could talk about it for hours. I could, but I don't fucking want to. I don't want to talk about this movie, and you already know why I hate it, so we're just gonna move on. The next one up is another one I talked about a couple times, and that's Spider-Man 2. And it's not just with the main story where they made Miles some big Gary Stu and basically made him Peter Parker's replacement. Now, the people were saying, no, they didn't. They didn't try to make him the replacement. They basically admitted it a few weeks after the game was released, so that argument doesn't work. But the main culprit was, one, MJ. Like, what the fuck was wrong with them with that? And again, making her a big Mary Sue despite having no powers whatsoever. And then there's the side missions with lesbian black cats, the one where you do a bunch of stupid light-bending puzzles, which belongs in a shovelware game, that talk about how great BIPOC artists are, or whatever it was. And then there was the infamous one where you fuck around helping some dude ask some other dude to homecoming. Even ignoring that, why is he bothering to do this? Spider-Man has better things to do than to fuck around with these idiots. God, this game was so bad. And I'm glad people are starting to see, like, okay, this isn't nearly as good as people thought, because recency bias is a big thing, and I'm so glad this didn't win any awards. Next one up is the one I probably should have talked about first, and it's Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And again, I've talked about this one so many times that you pretty much knew it was going to be on the list, especially if you saw the thumbnail, but it's self-explanatory. It was all the race-swapped casting, and again, it doesn't help the fact with one of their black leads, with Annabeth, they're trying to make her some big girl boss, which is not what she was in the books. She was snippy towards Percy and was competent and incredibly smart, but they're basically turning her into some stereotypical angry black girl throughout the entire show. And again, so that kind of defeats the whole purpose right then and there. And a bunch of the other casting, like Chiron and Clarice and Luke and Zeus, everybody was race swapped except for Percy, but he still doesn't look right. How do you fuck this up so badly? And by the way, this show would be getting ripped to fucking shreds if Rick Riordan's name wasn't attached. They'd be saying, oh, they ruined the books again, they screwed up the adaptation, they disrespected Riordan, but since Riordan's name is attached to it, because he sold himself out to Disney, they have to take the bullets for him. Next up is something I haven't talked about. Well, I talked about once, but I didn't watch it, and that's Velma. And much like Barbie, this one's self-explanatory, right? Like, it has to be. I obviously didn't watch this, so I didn't review it, obviously, because I'm not going to review something I haven't seen, but there's a reason I avoided it. That's how bad this was with not only its woke propaganda, but with just everything about it. The animation looked ugly, the voice acting was annoying, I don't like the person who created it, Minnie Kaling, she's annoying and kind of a bitch, so I just avoided this one like the plague. You all know why it's bad, everybody else has talked about it, so there was no point in even watching it. Next one up on the list is Across the SpiderVerse, and this one had more subtle propaganda to it than everything else did, much like Last of Us, which I could have included on this, but I decided not to because this list was already running long, so I decided to just cut it to 10, and that one just missed the list. But Gwen's whole story, even admitted by the people who made it, was supposed to be parallel to a coming out story or some shit. Even to the point where she's talking to her dad at the end, the colors morph into the trans flag, and that was not an accident. Not to mention, there's a flag up in a room saying "Protect Trans Kids," which is basically saying "Protect Abused Kids." And then you have race-swapped Spider-Woman. Like, seriously, and not to mention she's jumping around doing all this girl boss shit while she's pregnant, and that's not exactly the best thing for your fetus. Again, this one was a lot more subtle than the rest, so there's not much more to talk about. Moving on. Next one up is another one that I've talked about several times and is glaringly obvious, and that's The Little Mermaid with race-swapped Ariel. And again, they couldn't just make a new character here. This is the problem with these that's starting to go, because all of these race-swapped characters are coming from, and that's the biggest problem, is because you're not actually representing anybody. All you're doing is giving them hand-me-down characters. Eric July put it best, is that you're giving them the sloppy seconds. You're giving them hand-me-down characters, and that's why most of the people defending these castings are not minorities, they're white liberals. Anybody see the backwards logic there? So, next one up is Peter Pan and Wendy, and this one drives it even harder than Little Mermaid did. You have race-swapped Tinkerbell, you got race-swapped Peter Pan, and then, even worse than that, you have the Lost Theys. Because, God forbid, we have a group of all boys here, because that's sexist in modern anything, really. Modern movies, TV shows, video games, you name it. Having too many men or having too many white people is racist now. So let's just race and gender swap half the people in this fucking movie to make it more inclusive, and then have everybody hate it, and then blame racist trolls like they did with Little Mermaid, like they did with this movie, like they're doing with Percy Jackson. It's never going to fucking end. At least, although I will say, I'll give Bob Iger credit, he seems to have figured out that their woke bullshit is what tanked the company this year after they got beat out by Universal. Well, they did get beat by Illumination, but getting beat by Universal for the highest, for the most profitable movie company of the year, so it seems like he finally figured that out, which is why he took power back from Chapek. Will it fix anything? Probably not. He won't learn a goddamn thing from this. Next up is Elemental, and once again, this one is a bit more subtle, but the fact that they shoved it in your face before the movie came out is what made it all the more obvious. And this main one is that they had a kid who goes by they-them pronouns. Yeah, they had a quote-unquote non-binary character in this animated movie for kids. Moving on, because there's not much else to talk about. Forspoken. I obviously didn't play this. I don't think anybody fucking played this game. Where you have basically the same stereotypical black female protagonist that you get in every other pandering video game. That wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't the fact that she acts like the most stereotypical black person you can find. And then, of course, you have the villain who is played by, I'm assuming, a white guy, some generic British bloke. And then you have this black girl boss being able to take him on despite just getting these magic powers and fighting with a bunch of queens that you killed earlier in the game. You figure that one out. You'd think in a normal or a good video game, it would be allies helping you. They're not enemies that you killed earlier in the game, or at least maybe you took their power or something. Nope, they just show up as like Force Ghosts or some shit to help you defeat the villain who had much more understandable motivations and was honestly more likable than the protagonist. Yeah, I'm starting to see a trend. And finally, another one I talked about a couple times is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. Simple fact that Seth Rogen's name was attached to this already made me worried enough that it was going to be a bad movie. But they made things worse. First, they had Splinter basically get together with a male character, but they changed that to say, oh no, it's a female character. So they gender swapped the character to avoid more controversy, which is kind of funny to me. It almost seems like a cowardly move by them, but whatever. But the obviously biggest one was April. They made her some fat black girl instead of the redheaded one they've seen in every other iteration of the show. No, Megan Fox was not did not have red hair in her version of the franchise, but nobody liked her in that either, and I really didn't either. I thought the movies were fine, but she was not. This movie was just, again, this is the reason why Universal kicked all these studios' asses, is because it didn't have any pandering to it. Well, it had Ruby Gillman, but that was less pandering and more just a fucking bad movie. So yeah, that's the 10 biggest woke disasters we got of this year, and thankfully, most of these bombed. Some of them should have, and then the other ones should have bombed but didn't, and a lot of these tricked people into liking them. And that's the problem with the movie-going public and the TV show-watching public and the people who buy these AAA games at $70 for some reason. They refuse to admit it, and especially when it comes to the Percy Jackson fans, they are no longer defending the show. They are just trying to silence criticism. You can see my community tab for more information on that, where they are just desperate to silence criticism so that they don't have to put into work defending the garbage heap of a TV show that Percy Jackson and the Olympians is. And then these other movies like Little Mermaid and Peter, Pan and Wendy and Elemental bombed, and then the Velma show bombed. Apparently Percy Jackson isn't pulling in the numbers that Disney wanted, and Forspoken was a complete failure as well in the video game industry. So I hope 2024 is an improvement. I'm not sure what exactly will be the woke bullshit that we get next year, because Snow White got pushed back. So we'll just have to wait and see, but I hope we get a lot. I hope I don't have to make another one of these. So that's all I got, and I'll see you next time. Bye.